The school day was finally over, thus kicking off the beginning of spring break. I was 12 years old and in the 7th grade, so beach parties and clubs weren't really options for ways to spend the break. Because I really didn't have much to do, I decided to go with my dad to a funeral down in Yuma, Arizona. I figured it was an excuse to get out of San Antonio for a while. A few hours after school let out, my dad picked my sister and I up from our house. We then hit the road for Yuma. There was a light drizzle leaving the city, but when we were out in the middle of nowhere, the sky was dark and gray. Bolts of lightning lit up the sky. I remember my dad telling me, "I'm glad there's a storm. They say when it rains that it's a sign that the soul is resting." I never knew that. "I wonder how many other souls are put to rest with this storm," I said. The cold AC mixed with the sound of the storm and the fact that I had woken up early for school made me doze off here and there. I'd wake up at random moments, hearing the heavy rain against the window, the thunder roar, and my sister talking on the phone in the back seat. We drove through the night and through the storm until the sun came out and we arrived in Yuma. We were all pretty tired of riding in a Ford Taurus for such a long time, but we only got a small grace period to drop off our bags, then it was back inside the Taurus. We kept going south until we passed the border and hit Mexico. Luckily, it wasn't a long drive until we reached our destination. I don't remember whose house it was, but it was a one-story house with a separate apartment across the back. I thought it was very nice. The house was made of what looked like beige sandstone, with bits of glossy tile trimming. Right beside the house was an ocean of sand as far as the eye could see. I'd guessed that we were in a good side of this area, because nothing else in the way over the house was anywhere near as beautiful. Quite the opposite, actually. We walked into the yard and looked at the white casket, which the body rested in, and said a quick prayer. I looked around and realized that everyone was drinking and having what looked like a good time, just laughing and talking to each other. In my mind, I thought, funerals should genuinely be a sad thing, where people would be gloomy and some would be in tears, remembering the departed. I quickly realized that things were a bit different in Mexican funerals. Eventually, I joined in on the party and started shaking hands with uncles I had never met and talking to cousins I never even knew existed. I met a whole new side of my dad's family that day. Hours passed until it was finally time to take the casket to the church. I was eager to find out what would happen next. Everyone parked about a block away from the church. I felt more uncomfortable taking that quick walk to the church than I had my whole life. People were sitting in line side by side, trying to sell me and everyone else a variety of items. Again, everyone was conversing and holding beers while walking to the church, so it was no surprise to me when I saw some of my newfound relatives carrying beers right into the house of God. I couldn't be too hard on my kin, though, especially after seeing the priest fill a goblet right to the brim with the blood of Jesus. He downed the whole thing and then proceeded to take a 5-minute nap where he sat. At this point, I was just relaxing and enjoying the show, anxious to find out what would happen next. After the most awkward and comical experience I've ever had in a church, we walked out, passing up the line of beggars, got into our cars, and drove to another location. Once we reached the most insane-looking cemetery I'd ever seen, we all got out, and a few of the older men grabbed shovels. They then dug a 6-foot hole in the first vacant area they saw. Once the men were done, the casket was brought out. I was actually surprised that they didn't just throw the casket in the hole and call it a day. They slowly lowered the casket until it reached the bottom. But at that point, I'd already had enough of the show. I was pretty pissed. I don't know if it was because of the people who were still laughing and joking while digging the hole, or when somebody actually proceeded to pour beer over the casket, but I just saw things as a total lack of respect. While members of the family were still saying their goodbyes, I looked around and noticed the younger kids were just running around the empty area. The parents just let them run around there, as far as the kids wanted to go, free to be abducted by anyone who'd care to take them. They were picking up and playing with anything they found, from broken bottles to shards of rusty metal. I thought I'd catch some sort of disease by just the sight of it all. After the goodbyes were said, they just started dumping dirt, along with beer bottles and other items of trash, onto the casket, until you couldn't even tell that there was anything buried underneath. All that was left to do was drive back to the house. "What the hell is the matter with these damn people?" I asked, not really caring who'd answer. "What do you mean?" my dad asked back. "I mean, why the hell were they just drinking and having a good time while they were lowering the casket? It's a funeral, and they're acting like it's a goddamn party? It's like they didn't even know someone was dead," I said. My sister added in by saying, "Oh, I know. That was so weird. They didn't even care what the kids were doing." "That's just the way they do things over here. I guess they'd rather celebrate that the person was here for so long than mourn over their passing," my dad answered. After that, I basically just said screw it and hoped I'd never have a Mexican funeral. Once we got back to the house, it was as if we never left. Everyone was drinking and eating and laughing. My sister and I had stuck together while talking to our cousins. Hours seemed like seconds, and before we knew it, it was already 4 o'clock in the morning. You would never have known unless you looked at the clock, though. Not one single person was fazed by the time. Not one droopy or sleepy-looking face in the crowd of relatives. Soon after that, though, I began to feel a little drowsy and asked my dad when we were going to leave. Apparently, we were going to leave 30 minutes afterward, but of course I knew that wasn't going to happen, so I asked if there was a place that I could lay down and maybe take a nap until then. An unfamiliar aunt had taken me to a room and said I could lie down there until it was time to leave. Once my head hit the pillow, I blacked out. I don't remember much, but I remember waking up every so often and hearing the sounds of an old anime cartoon and something about jelly beans. I woke up with the feeling that I've grown to love. I looked around and had no idea where I was or how I got there. It all came back to me after a minute or so, though. For a while, I just laid there while the sun from the window was blinding me. Then I slowly got up, out of bed, and lazily walked out of the room, heading to the yard. I walked outside and made my way to a small ice chest, hoping there'd be something other than warm beers inside. I was incredibly thirsty since I really didn't drink anything in the hours before I went to sleep. A wave of relief washed over me when I opened the ice chest and saw 2 bottles of Tropicana OJ floating alongside 2 bottles of Budweiser. After I grabbed a bottle of orange juice, I downed it and walked towards my dad, who was still sitting down and talking to some relatives. Good God, how could this man still be awake? I wondered, remembering he had been awake for over 48 hours now. About 30 minutes after that, we said goodbye to our relatives and headed back up to Yuma, where we were going to grab some breakfast and relax for a few hours. We were going back for round 2 later on during the day.